Hello, good afternoon. It is the 3rd of December 2022 and I am continuing to read from the story I started in 2006, Bliss, Afterlife. We are now at chapter 66 and Bliss died a few years ago at 95, and this is the story concerning a reincarnation and the people involved in her family. Chapter 66. Susan prepares for Christmas. Susan knew after Christmas the demand for rooms would be more, and she wanted to freshen up the house. There were only 9 staying in the refuge at the moment, and Chris and Anna had been helping to clear and paint 4 rooms. They had just finished putting the furniture back in and had all taken a break. She had made herself a cup of tea and was looking carefully at each room. They looked fantastic. All the rooms were really individual. They had a lot of furniture from charity shops or donated things, and Susan enjoyed repainting wardrobes and chairs, and some time ago they had a great knitting circle which met every week for a good 2 years. They were producing lovely throws and blankets, which now made all the rooms look really cozy and bright. They had accumulated such a variety of colours and styles. She thought it a pity the group sort of fell apart. There's always so much change in the house. She was thinking of starting it off again in the new year. Turns out Anna and Faye both knew how to knit, which had started a whole discussion on the benefits of it. All the newly painted rooms had their knitted throws and cushions. All together had decided on the colours, and they had done a great job. It fitted wonderfully all together. She made a mental note to get some wool. She had seen a big basket full of one of these in one of the local charity shops, and she could ask Holly to look at her local ones. They had some great charity shops on their high street. She still had lots of knitting needles and all sorts of things somewhere. In fact, right here it was. Knitting stuff. Just as well I'd noticed, she thought. All the furniture had been crammed into the various rooms whilst they were painting the others, and she wanted to note what was put where. It was not all in the big hall cupboard. Anyhow, only a little more to do, and she was looking forward to putting some decorations up for Christmas. This would be the first English Christmas for Faye and for Anna, and she wanted to organize it all in good time before they were back in a few days. She was so glad Anna had written to her parents. She hoped they would respond soon. Anna had been grappling with it the last few days. She heard her coming into the kitchen, and when she walked in, Anna was already sitting at the computer. I have to see if they responded. Yes, I can imagine, Sue said. Shall I make you a cup of tea? I'm having another one myself. Susan filled the kettle. That would be lovely. I feel so nervous somehow. I do really hope he has come back to me. Oh yes, great, he has. I'm so glad. She felt quiet to read her email. The kettle had boiled, and Susan put the mug of tea next to Anna and left the room to let her be in peace. Chapter 67. Ben and Faye had a great time in Hamburg. His Aunt Berry had redecorated the house. Well, she and a friend who often accompanied his aunt, and was obviously a whiz with the painting and all things DIY. And it looked wonderful. She had a large, mostly glass winter garden, or conservatory as we say, at the back, which looked out into her garden and fields. They had been visiting a few places in town, had some wonderful Japanese food, and he was so happy to show her this place. He had spent so many happy holidays here, and it was fun to show Faye his favorite places. Hamburg was a beautiful city. Much has changed, Ben was saying to her, but to her it all seemed interesting. She loved the historic churches and the area around the harbour. that had really been done up, apparently. He had taken her to the family weekend place just outside Hamburg, by a little lake, and she wished it had frozen, as Ben's stories of skating on there sounded so fun. The weather had been very cold, but not that cold. It was really crisp outside, and they had visited a Christmas market and were meeting Barry at the little glühwein stand. They only had 2 more days and then back to London for Christmas. He had just ordered 2 glasses when his aunt turned up. She had been rushing around getting Christmas presents and had quite a few bags. "Oh, great timing. I shall have a glühwein, 2 please." They all sat down on the little... No, I shall have a glühwein too, please. They all sat down on the little bar stools around their small tables. It was quite lovely everywhere, with all the Christmas lights and general festive atmosphere, with straws and music, and Faye loved it all. Oh, I do like hot wine. Faye had never had it before, but thought it was delicious. She started to feel warmer. "Is it very strong?" "Well, not very strong, but like wine, although sometimes they put a little of brandy in there. Tastes like these ones might have. I feel warmer already." They all laughed. It was a freezing day, and hot spiced wine was just the right thing to have. "How have you been getting on with your shopping, Mary?" "All done. Mainly Petra and Eleanor, of course, bought some little things, but they like vouchers, and I've got some clothes for them. I like something for Jörg. He has been great with helping in the house, decorating it and so on, and a little something for you two. We shall have a pre-Christmas dinner tonight. Petra and Eleanor are cooking. They have made a roast, English style, with roasted beef and potatoes, Yorkshire pudding and various veggies. So lovely that they are of an age now where I can leave them be and not have to worry to leave them alone in the kitchen. Gosh, I remember when Petra almost set our kitchen alight by overheating oil years ago. Don't remind me. Well, she is now quite a good cook, actually. Seems to love making meals, and it suits me just fine. Although I'm not traveling so much anymore, the general global commerce has really turned around with all this credit crisis. My business changed so much over the last 20 years. I feel much less inclined to set off on trips, and I have been enjoying a much less hectic time. I'm sure you have been hearing about banks collapsing and all these stories. Yes, I cannot help hearing about it all, and although I consider myself not very political, it seems to be affecting almost every aspect of society and country. They have been bailing the banks out, you know. I was talking to Peter. He's financially very astute and has a lot of friends in that world. Back a few years ago, the whole property market in the US collapsed. All these bonds which were traded were a sham. This crisis of debt seems to go on and on. I did not really hear any of the inside information, though, through the news. You hear nothing there. I feel we are only told what we are meant to hear, and not the whole truth, or maybe none of the truth. So I avoid it altogether. That only makes me feel powerless if I listen in to too much of that. I'm so glad that my job as a journalist seems pretty secure. With all this stuff going on in the world, it will be interesting when I get back to China to see how it plays out over there. The political TV coverage, etc., is very different. Yes, indeed, interesting. Barry drank the last of her glass. Faye only had half a glass. She only wanted to taste it, and Ben poured the rest of hers into his. I would love to put my feet up. She suddenly felt really tired. Yes, let's go. Dinner should be ready soon, and I'm ready for it. Tony grabbed most of her bags, and they walked off to the car park. Chapter 68. Anna. Wet my whistle. Her dad had been so happy to hear from her. Her mum had become a little worried, and they were both relieved that she was fine. She had told them that she is going to stay, and they were now both saying that they wanted to come over to London and see her. Her dad seemed to have been waiting for an opportunity to come over and visit his old hometown, and they were talking about January. She felt a little overwhelmed, had not really expected to see them so soon, and was contemplating how this would work, where they would stay, etc. They were both retired. They will be surprised how expensive life is here. Anyhow, she decided to talk to Susan about it. She would love to see her parents, maybe discover London a little more together with them, but she had no money at the moment and was wondering if she could get a job. The house was done, and maybe there was something she could do, a bar job or something. She was waiting for Susan to come back from the shops and went to greet her when she heard the door. Susan was well connected, and she was hoping might be able to have some ideas. Chapter 69. Melanie is off to Germany. Melanie was on the tube to the airport. She had taken the train to London, and all had worked out really well time-wise. Her flight was in 2 hours. She was on her way to her Oma. She would be spending Christmas with her. She usually stayed with her other grandmother in London over Christmas, but Oma was now almost 88, and although they talked on the phone, she missed her, and had decided quite spontaneously to travel to see her. Her London granny had a lot of friends and was very understanding. She would never spend Christmas alone anyway. Grandma knew Oma anyway, and so they had booked her journey last week. She loved going somewhere. Beforehand she was always fretting around to the packing and someone to feed her cat, etc. Tony had popped in for a coffee a couple of days ago, and they had a lovely time sitting in the sunny kitchen chatting. He was cute. He was spending Christmas at his Aunt Susan's, and it sounded like it was going to be a big crowd with his cousin Ben and Faye. She hoped that she would meet them before long and before they went back to China in January. She felt so connected to Tony that she was almost glad to get away, as she thought about him all the time. She remembered almost his every word when they were off on their separate ways. How can she miss him? She didn't even know him well at all. Their conversations were always so stimulating. She was usually the one who pontificated on wisdom with friends. Mio had given her so much insight since she was small that she often felt out of place with people who moaned about their tea not having been hot enough. It had so often made her an outsider, this rejection of negativity. She was so clear in herself with some people she could feel completely herself. Both her grandmothers were wonderful. Very different to each other, but both had given her so much confidence and love throughout her life that she always felt trusting her intuition or gut feeling was the only way to live. Even when her parents had the terrible accident, she had never felt alone. She found most people were thinking the same thoughts and doing the same things every day, and she often felt dragged down by them. She had got much better over time. Talking to Mio, she knew that this was exactly why she had come to incarnate here again, to share and serve and have fun, evolve, progress, manifest. These were far too fancy words for many of her old schoolmates, and she learned early to keep quiet. Tony was fantastic to talk to. He listened, and he seemed to have an understanding she rarely came across. He was also very fit and handsome. Oh, her heart started racing just thinking about it all. He had sent a lovely text wishing her a good journey. She was on the train to Gatwick now, and decided to switch her music on to distract all these thoughts. She was looking forward to her Oma and couldn't wait to tell her what happened in the last few months. Almost a year since she had last seen her. She smiled to herself. All good in the hood, she thought. Chapter 69. Susan. was looking for my glasses, but it doesn't matter. Susan had been out for last-minute Christmas shopping and had one of the most incredible experiences she could remember. She had to sit down and have a cup of tea to gather her thoughts. No one was around at the refuge, and she put the kettle on. Her thoughts were racing. David. She had not thought of him for years. Well, not that she could even remember, but he had been such a heartthrob when she and Holly were teenagers. Until she started going out with Steve, she had considered David the love of her life. She smiled to herself, allowing herself to remember these days. He was a guitarist and was probably the one who started the regular rehearsals and jams in the garage. Steve had known him from college. He was older by almost 7 years, and Susan remembered her first sexual experience. She must have been around 17. David was in his 20s and seemed always much older than all of them. He was so much fun, talked a lot and always wrote lyrics. She had been smitten with him, but after they had slept together, she sort of knew that this was not going to be a forever relationship. He moved to Australia shortly after, where his sister lived. She thought it was just after her 18th birthday or so. Steve and the others kept meeting to play together, and she had often been around there as well. Sometimes she worried how vague it had all become. She could barely remember the sequence of events which led to her marriage with Steve. But she did remember being happy. She recognized him immediately, and he saw her at the same time. Wow, that was some feeling. They had both agreed. Obviously, she thought, what? They had both aged, obviously, she thought, and was glad she had shed quite a few pounds in the last year and had a haircut not long ago. She had been feeling very good and was looking for something nice and new to wear for Christmas. All the shopping was done and in the car, and she heard his voice. It sent shockwaves through her. Turning around, he was already looking at her, and they hugged. He had come back to England 3 months ago, had been married in Australia, had 2 girls, 28 and 35. His wife had passed away 10 years ago through cancer, and one of his daughters had come back to England with him. The other one still lived in Perth, married, with a little boy of 3. They had been chatting away. They had to keep looking at each other to believe it all. Well, over 30 years had passed since they had last laid eyes on each other. They tried to work it out and failed. He invited her for a coffee, and they never stopped talking for 2 hours. He had gone through quite a lot with his wife's illness. He had cared for her almost 4 years before she passed, and he found it hard to get himself together when it all happened. Thankfully, their girls were almost grown up now, but all of them took time to adjust living without their mother. She found herself talking about Steve and the breakup and her sister, the refuge. So much life had been lived since their ways parted. He looked well, though, in good shape. He would be in his late 60s now, she pondered. She felt like talking to Holly. It was absolutely necessary. Wow, what a day. Chapter 70. Bliss. Bliss and part of her soul group were sitting on the ledge of a huge mountain with a spectacular view over lakes and winding rivers. Far below they could see the sun reflecting on the water. All had agreed on the visual and were contemplating the lives of loved ones, still physical, on the earthly plane. Bliss was excited for Susan, having met David again, a quite important soul in her group. David and Susan had incarnated together in the past, many times. They had been brothers, sisters, friends, and family members in various lives, but they had never been in a love relationship together, and Bliss knew that meeting him again had been on the cards for Susan. It had turned out that Steve had not been her forever lover and love, although she had been happy for years with him. It was not meant to last. Little did she know that she was always going to meet David again. David had left for Australia because he found Susan fascinating, but he felt far too young to start a committed relationship, and the decision to move so far away had been a deliberate one on his part. He had loved Margaret, but he had never been in love with her as he had been with Susan. He had enjoyed most of his years in Australia very much, and having his children with Margaret had been a wonderful experience. Of course, he had also forgotten that his marriage with her had also been a contract, and Margaret was back here, where Bliss was. She was in a different soul group, but both Susan and David were part of the group sitting on the ledge. All 10 souls, had to all 10 souls, if one had to put it into words, were keenly interested in watching the development, and there was cheer in the group that the long envisaged meeting had finally taken place. They had had other chances to run into each other over the last 10 years, but it had never materialized, and their paths had only now been meeting in this new direction. "Ah, they deserve to meet each other finally," Bliss exclaimed when they were laughing about the near misses. The first one, when Margaret was still alive and David had come over for a brief visit to settle some affairs in England. "I'm mighty glad they didn't meet before Margaret had passed over to us." Yes, that would have been more of a drama than an exciting adventure in those days. Things are unfolding, and we shall be needed for our frequencies and vibrations. This is chapter 70, and I shall continue with chapter 71. It's too dark. Good night.